I witness that there is only one God, and that Muhammad is his messenger. May God forgive me the times I have fought against you.
Islam does away with all that went before it.
I'm sorry, I came in here wearing...
Here are my jewels. What they are worth, I give to the poor.
And may I offer you my...
Yes. But you were the bitterest sword against Islam.
Now, by the will of God, I will be the raised sword of God.
So everyone, we are joined by Mr. Michael Forrest, who is the actor who played the role of Khalid bin Walid in the famous 1976 film, The Message. Welcome, Mr. Forrest, and thank you so much for agreeing to do this interview. I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, of course.
What happened before?
I have to say, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Well, I was just going to say that, before I started recording this interview, when I rang you up, I wasn't really sure what kind of person I'm going to get on the other side. But as soon as you picked it up, you didn't even allow me to say hello, and you said, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. So that was just really nice, and it put me at ease.
I'm glad it did. It's one of those things that I recall from learning Arabic a little bit, and I mean a very little bit. That language is not, for foreigners, it's very difficult to learn, but I tried to learn as much as I could. But of course, after all these years, it's 45 years ago or so or more, that unless you use it, you're going to forget it. And unfortunately, I haven't had any occasion to use it, except at that moment when I answered the phone, I thought it was appropriate.
Yeah, it definitely was, appropriate. As you know, most Muslims are actually non-Arabs. So most of us don't speak Arabic as a language anyways. But we are, very strongly encouraged to try to learn the Arabic of the Quran so that we can better understand what we're reciting, when we recite our Holy Scripture. But the joke I like to make is I just, on a light note, I say that, back in high school, I knew guys who knew how to say, I love you, baby, in Tagalog, in Spanish, in Portuguese, in Korean. And what was the reason for that? The reason was because the guy had like a Korean girlfriend once, and then he had a French girlfriend, and a Spanish girlfriend, and a Filipino girlfriend. So the point being that love will motivate us to do many things. So the love of the Quran will motivate many of us Muslims to try to learn some Arabic at least,
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, as you know, and I think as you've been briefed, I did have a list of very interesting questions I wanted to ask you here. And I do understand that, we're traveling back 40 years in your career. And I don't expect, that you're going to have all the answers or remember everything off of the top of your head, No,
and particularly as I get older, I'm now 91 years old, and it becomes difficult to retain or remember even things that happened to me 6 months ago. At least I'm not senile. At least I don't think I am.
Oh, no. You're more coherent than even many young people that I speak to, and unfortunately, that's not an exaggeration because. I'm going off topic here, but I think now with the proliferation of drugs and weed and all of this stuff,
oh my God.
I speak to a lot of young people who are just like, they're not able to have a coherent conversation sometimes.
I know what you mean. In fact, I've known some close friends were unfortunately addicted and passed away. Unfortunately, it was very sad, particularly in the years, to have have that addiction really put them into such a state of, like, I can't even, I wouldn't even know how to characterize it, but it was very sad to see the ending to several people that I knew.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. It's to your credit that you were in an industry. I mean, again, I don't want to generalize or stereotype, but what we hear as outsiders, we hear that, there's a lot of drug problems and things like that. So for someone like you to have made it through in one piece and have managed to avoid those pitfalls, that is very much to your credit,
Well, thank you. I mean, I remember people would be taking some hard drug of some kind. They say, "You want to have a little of this?" And I say, "Listen, maybe later on I'll try it, but right now, no." And I never did. I always said no. I don't want to characterize myself as a Mr. Good Guy or anything, but I just felt that it was not for me.
Yeah.
I drank. I'm not a big alcoholic or anything like that, but I like my drink in the afternoon, and I still do. I have one drink in the afternoon before dinner, and that's satisfactory for me. I enjoy it. I don't need any more than that, nor really ever have.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people that do get caught up in that life of drugs or hard drugs, I think what they don't realize in the moment, they think, well, it's my choice. I do what I want to do. What they don't realize is that they are affecting their future spouse, their future children, their parents, their siblings who might have to bear some of the responsibilities that otherwise they were supposed to be bearing. So you did not only yourself, but I'm sure you did your missus and your family a favor too by avoiding that. Yeah.
You're only doing other people. It's not only yourself you're benefiting, but you're benefiting a lot of other people that family and close friends and so forth.
Yes, sir.
Never encouraged anybody to ever take any hard drugs of any kind.
Yes, sir.
Maybe a little weed once in a while, a little marijuana, so what? That's not bad.
Yeah, I guess that's the California mindset. But for me, I don't know. It's just I say fried chicken is my crack cocaine. Fried chicken is my crack cocaine. Yeah. Yeah, put me in front of fried chicken, all the discipline, all the talk, it all goes out the window. But yeah. So, sir, I wanted to ask you, I mean, maybe this is the best question to actually start with, is that obviously this is the first time I'm speaking to anyone who was involved with this project, the 1976 film,
really?
the Message. Oh, yes. Yeah. So, by the way, just to share a little bit about myself, I'm 44 years old, by the way. Yeah, I was born
around when I was doing it.
Yes, no. So I grew up watching this film with you in it, right? I'm one of those kids who grew up. I'm an 80s kid. And my parents came to Canada from Pakistan. I was born here. And, there was a movie about Moses, who Muslims also believe in, by the way, like the 10 Commandments. That's a classic. There were many Jesus films. But in English, back in the 80s, this was that one film that the Muslim community had, The Message with Anthony Quinn and Irene Papas. So the question to you was that, are you, I know actors often do projects and they move on, and that's just the way things are. But over the years, did it dawn on you that this film has a lot of lasting power and that it's been very impressionable on many Americans and especially on young Muslims who grew up watching it?
Well, I've often wondered that. I know that as far as I was concerned, I had never been to any Arabic countries. I'd never been to North Africa. I was looking forward to it when this all came about. And any place you go, you're always going to learn about customs and people, the way people live and so forth. And I was looking forward to it. And I must say I was not disappointed in what I found. As I was on it for 53 weeks, I was on that film.
Oh, my goodness.
We first were in,
maybe Morocco first before Libya?
Morocco. We were in Morocco to begin with. And then of course, Libya. We shot at both places, mostly in Libya. But my impression at first, I was, incredibly impressed by the customs are so different. People are so different.
Yes.
And yet, it was always, I never found anybody being disrespectful. They were always pleasant. They may have not been openly friendly. They were never like hostile.
Yeah.
I remember anytime I go on a film, on a location, I always try to walk around a bit in the area.
Yes.
To get to familiarize myself with the way the food and clothing that people wear, and I was fascinated by the difference between what I saw in North Africa as compared to what I was familiar with here in America. And of course, I lived in Rome for 10 years prior to before I went to North Africa. I'd been in Rome for about 6 years or so.
Oh, I see.
5 years. And then I was there afterwards for another 5 years. So I was familiar with European customs, of course, American. But it was an interesting experience for me to be around and talking with people in the Arab countries. I remember once in Libya, we went on a kind of a little sojourn, 5 of us in a car, and we got into kind of a small little town in Libya, just off of the coast of the Mediterranean. And I thought, now they didn't understand us in English. We didn't understand Arabic, so I thought, because of the invasion of Italy into Libya during the Second World War, I thought, let me try Italian. And I spoke to this one young guy, and he said, whatever he said in Arabic, which meant wait. And he brought his grandfather out. His grandfather spoke Italian. We were able to communicate in Italian for the short time we were there in this Arabic country, which we found fascinating. That we were able to communicate with each other,
Yeah. I mean,
translate.
Yeah. I mean, that's why, I mean, traveling is really the best teacher. It's so educational. I mean, as you know, people nowadays talk about Islam and the West, Islam and the West, but they don't realize that for many hundreds of years, Islam was the West, right? It took over the Byzantine Empire. But not only that, but even where you were in Libya, I'm sure in your travels, then at some point you may have come across the Roman ruins, or perhaps the ruins of Carthage.
I don't think we ever.
Yeah, and as for the more contemporary Italian influence, I had a similar experience when I traveled to Tunisia. So in Tunisia, in a little village where they have the remains or the ruins of one of these Roman amphitheaters. So there's a bit of a small tourist industry there. But I ordered pizza at this little place in Tunisia, not knowing really what to expect. I am telling you, Mr. Forrest, it was one of the best pizzas I ever had in my life, And as for the speaking Italian, I've seen that phenomenon here in my area as well with some of the people from Somalia. So some of the elders, above the age of like 50 or 60, some of them speak fluent Italian. Yeah.
I found it really refreshing that I was able to communicate, when you're capable of speaking Arabic. I know in one case in Morocco, I speak a bit of French.
Okay.
And I was able to speak in broken French with the Arabic people who also spoke kind of broken French. We were able to communicate. We understood each other, and I found it fascinating.
Yes.
Absolutely fascinating.
Yep, absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, I didn't know that. I had no idea that you spent 53 weeks there. So like that's, basically a year. I mean, would that have been true for the rest of the cast? Like, would do you think Anthony Quinn was there that long?
He wasn't there quite as long. No, he wasn't there quite as long. His part kind of finished up.
Of course, yeah.
Did not had a bigger part or anything, but it was just one of those things. He left a little bit early, maybe a couple of weeks before I did.
Right. So how did you first get involved with this project? Was it the regular kind of like casting agent contacts you or something like this? And what did you think of the idea of the film when it first got proposed to you?
Of the what? I'm sorry, the idea of what?
Well, what did you think of the whole idea of making a film on the life of the Prophet Muhammad?
I had come from Rome, and I was visiting in L.A., in Los Angeles, at my former wife's house, my house, and we were standing outside. I was just getting ready to leave, and a car came roaring by. We were lived up in the hills. A car came roaring by, and all of a sudden, the screech backed up, and the guy said, Michael, he said, what are you doing? I thought you were in Rome. And I said, well, I'm leaving tomorrow, going back. He says, oh, my God. He said, listen, he says, I'm working with the Arabs. Shh, don't say anything. He was Jewish. He says, oh, don't say anything. He says, but I'm working with the Arabs. I said, oh, that's great. And he said, have you got a picture? I said, a picture? Yeah. Well, you never know. And my wife went in, or ex-wife went in and got a picture and brought it out to him. And he says, great picture. He said, you never know. Well, see ya. And he roared away.
Yeah. Were you sporting a beard at that time?
Huh?
Were you sporting a beard at that time?
No, I was not.
Okay.
I had no beard at all.
Okay.
But anyway, I went back to Rome the next day, and 1 month later, I get a call from my agent in Rome saying, listen, they want to see you in London.
Oh, wow.
For this Arab picture. I said, oh, my God. Bundy Martone was the name of the director who was doing all of the stunt work and all of that stuff.
Okay.
An American.
Yes.
Bundy Martone is his name. At any rate, they said they're going to fly you up there to meet the director. And I said, oh, my God. So I flew up there in the morning and went to the, I forget what hotel it was, one of the big hotels. And the minute I walked in and met him, Moustapha Akkad,
yes.
director, he came up and looked me straight in the face and looked into my eyes, and he said, yes, brown. Everybody's eyes who were in it had to be brown.
Okay.
So I had brown eyes, so I qualified that way. So I spent talking with him that morning and early afternoon. He said, if you'd like to stay over, you can, or you can go back to Rome. I said, I think I'll go back to Rome, which I did. And then, as I say, a month later, I got the call. They wanted me to do it. I thought, wow. And I had not been standing outside of my house in Los Angeles that day. And at that moment, when Bundy drove past and then came to a halt, seeing me there, one way or the other, 5 minutes one way or the other, it would never have happened. I would never have been in that film.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's that's what we Muslims would call fate. That's an example of fate. Moustapha Akkad, by the way, for the viewers, those people who haven't watched The Message, or a lot of the American population might know him better as the executive producer of the Halloween movies, right? The horror series Halloween.
That I didn't know.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah.
I did not know that.
Oh, yeah. The famous, even the classic 1978, Michael Myers Halloween. He's the producer of that.
Oh, really?
Yes.
I had no idea.
Yeah, no joke. No, I'm 100% serious.
Afterwards.
You're right. Yeah. That would have been after The Message. That's correct. So one question I really want to ask you, sir, is, Did you do any kind of general like reading up on Islam or on the character Khalid bin Walid? Like Khalid bin Walid was, one of the most famous, celebrated military leaders of early Islam, the early Islamic community. Did they just kind of brief you on that, or what was there any?
They briefed me. I didn't. When I was told I was saying Khalid, it was just a name.
Yes.
And then as time went on, I began to get filled in by people who would talk about him. And when I was introduced to people, not necessarily in the film, but who were friends of people, and they would ask what role I played, and I'd say they'd say, well, he's playing Khalid. And of course, there was an immediate reaction of, oh my God. So I became aware very early on that this was some very famous person.
Yes.
I had no idea who he was before, because I was, like a lot of Western people, we didn't know much about the Muslim world or Muhammad. We knew the name, of course, as I did, but I was not a big fan of his, or did I know much about him historically. I just knew the name and so forth. But I learned an awful lot as time went on. And then I learned who Khalid was, that he was very famous, and without him, perhaps Muhammad would not have succeeded.
Right. It's interesting that you worded it that way when you said, he was just like a name, because I've got a very similar quote. This is from a gentleman. I'm not sure if you would remember. His name is Garrick Hagon. He played another character in The Message. Yeah, Garrick Hagon. Yeah, he played.
I think he's Canadian, wasn't he?
Oh, I did not know that. I've been trying to contact him as well, so maybe I'll find out. But for the Muslims listening, he played Garrick Hagon. That is, he played the character of Ammar bin Yasir, which was another companion of the Prophet Muhammad. But I came across a quote of his in a news story. He was also commenting about the filming of this film. So this is what he said. He said, quote, "At that time, we didn't know much about Islam. Muhammad was a name." Almost the exact words you said. Muhammad was a name, and that was about all. So it was all pretty much of a revelation. That sounds like what you said about Khalid and about the Prophet. Yeah.
That's exactly the way I would characterize it.
Yeah.
It was just the name, and certainly I had no idea who Khalid was. I mean, the name was completely foreign to me. But then as time went on, I learned more and more about him as to how significant he was in Muhammad's quest.
Yeah, I think part of what makes him very unique and very powerful is that he's associated both with tragedy as well as success of the early Muslim community. Because if you recall, in the second early battle that the early Muslims were engaged in, Khalid bin Walid was actually like on the anti-Muslim side, right? He was with the pagan Arabs. And he was responsible. Yeah, he was responsible for massacring like a good number of prominent companions of the Prophet Muhammad at the second battle. It was called the Battle of Uhud. But of course, shortly before the conquest of Mecca, he converted to Islam, and he was renamed by the Prophet as Saifullah, the sword of God. And then he became a force like for Islam, and he helped the Islamic Empire to expand into Persia and into the Byzantine territories and so forth. So I think that's what makes him powerful. Like, he's associated with both like a very tragic moment as well as with great political and military successes as well.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that's what I understood too. I didn't know what you just related. I do recall hearing in a very general way, but I didn't know kind of that historical background of the man.
And just, this was another thought that occurred to me. Now, I don't expect that you would remember this scene. If you do, that's great. But there is a scene in the film towards the latter half of the film, after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. This was kind of a peace treaty that was made between the Muslims and the Meccan pagans. And so during this time of peace, now there could be some trade and diplomacy, and people were able to meet with their families from the other side, exchange ideas. So a lot of preaching of Islam happened during this phase. And there was a scene in the film where there are some Muslims just kind of sitting somewhere in an oasis, and they are relating stories and reports of the Prophet Muhammad, what his teachings are, what he says, what he teaches them to do. And you're on a horse watching from afar, but you're listening in. I don't know if you would remember this scene. I remember it because I just watched it very recently. And you kind of just, you just kind of blink to yourself a few times and you're thinking about it. And you can see the transition, like your heart is kind of starting to melt, or you're starting to modify your thinking process. Like maybe these aren't bad, evil guys. Maybe these aren't some evil political revolutionaries who hate us or something like that. And sorry to make that long, but I think one of the reasons that scene is powerful for me is because it's kind of symbolical of the American population as a whole. My assessment, I could be wrong, my assessment is that the majority of the American population, you probably can't categorize as being like pro-Islam or overly sympathetic towards Islam. But at the same time, I don't think the majority hate or are completely antagonistic towards Islam either. I think a lot of them just don't know what to make of Islam. And in that scene, that's your situation in that scene, that you're not quite sure what to make of this, but you're listening and you're considering. Do you remember that scene at all? Or?
Well, I must say I don't.
Okay.
I don't remember it, but I remember, though, that what you were just relating was also related by Moustapha, to give me an idea of how this change took place.
Okay.
With Khalid. So I don't remember that specific moment on horseback, but I'm sure that what I was doing was like that transition from disliking Muhammad and his followers to liking him and eventually, of course, boosting him and his progress.
Yeah, that summarizes exactly, like, I think the emotions that Khalid is supposed to be experiencing in that scene. And I just thought you conveyed it very well. And, can I convince you to watch that film again? Because it really is worth watching,
Yeah, well, it's like, as I said, it was a learning experience for me, as well as working in a film as an actor. You also are learning, and particularly in this case where I had no idea about the religion. And I think here in this country, which is true of a lot of Western countries, there is it's not just a dislike for them, but it's a not understanding the Muslim religion.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Say Muslim religion? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Islam, or the Muslim religion. That's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's true for a lot of people. I think, unfortunately, in this world, this is true of all religions.
Yes.
All religions are, unless, for example, I mean, I'm a Catholic. Right. But I have always had some reservations about the Catholic religion.
I see.
And then I say, well, but there's an old saying: once a Catholic, always a Catholic. So, even though there are some things about it that I don't agree with, right, and dislike, I think it's true for all religions. People, if you don't understand something, you're not going to like it particularly. Right, it's an unfortunate situation. And I think, unfortunately, throughout the world, this is true with almost every religion. Yeah. If you don't understand it, you're not going to like it. And that's unfortunate.
Yeah. And so, as not for me to just kind of play the Muslim victim card or something, I want to put this out there that I've seen it from the other side as well. I've seen other people who just had a bad idea of non-Muslims, or they think like all non-Muslims are belligerent or antagonistic or racist or something like this. And then they learned that wasn't the case. So I have a very good friend from Pakistan who was raised in Pakistan, and he just thought all Westerners, are, racist, bad people, and they hate Islam. When he immigrated to Canada, not out of his choice, actually. It was his parents who were immigrating. Well, once he came there, he started working at a local Pizza Hut. He became good friends with a guy from somewhere like Eastern Europe somewhere. And he realized that, a lot of the ideas that he had about Westerners was wrong. So it's a two-way street, I think. When we meet and mix with people, we realize that it's people. It's people on the other side as well.
So true.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah.
Could not agree with you more.
Now, my purpose here was not to delve into theology and stuff, but I can't resist because you've put some low-lying fruit out there for me, and I just need to throw this in. Is that, like a lot of Islamic beliefs overlap with that of Christianity or Catholicism, but in a modified form. So, for example, we Muslims, we would not go so far as to call Jesus the Son of God or to call Mary the Mother of God, whatever is meant by that term or that appellation in the Catholic tradition. However, there is a very high reverence for both of these figures in the Quran. So Jesus, I know you know this already, but Jesus is recognized as a prophet of God. But in addition to that, chapter 19 of the Quran is actually named after Mary. So it's called Surah Maryam, which means the chapter of Mary. And again, while not considering her to be divine in any way, we do consider her to be a great servant and a great saint, a worshiper of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's tell you something that has occurred to me as we were speaking here.
Yes, sir.
In that company, during the weeks that I was on it, 22 countries were represented in that film. 22 countries.
Oh, wow.
Except for one, and I mean one minor little argument between two women.
Yes.
I don't know if they were of the same religion. I think they were.
Okay.
Got into a little tizzy.
Okay.
No one did we ever have any problems at all. And there were Jews working with Arabs, Christians working with Jews and Arabs.
Wow.
And never a problem.
Awesome.
No problems. And then I thought to myself, why can't the world be like this?
Yeah.
It happened in a film with this close contact with each other.
Yeah.
Never a problem.
And there was also, I'm thinking there was a Greek on that set as well. Irene Papas, right? Greek.
Well, Irene Papas, of course.
Yeah. So.
The fellow who played my counterpart in it was from Lebanon.
Yes.
One of the nicest men I ever met. He spoke English. Of course, I couldn't speak Arabic.
Right.
He could speak English, and the two of us got along like brothers.
Yeah. Well, again,
When we met.
Yeah. Again, I gotta plug Islam a little bit here, sir, because what I would say is that that's symbolical in some ways of the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him, because I'm not sure if you're aware, but one of his companions was an Arab, but had been raised in the Byzantine territories. So they used to call him the Roman because, culturally he was Romanized to some extent. He also had Black African followers. So I'm sure you remember the character of Bilal, the Ethiopian from the film. He had a wife who was of Jewish ethnicity as well. So, and he had a Persian follower, of course. There was one named Salman al-Farisi, Salman the Persian. So even within the lifetime of the Prophet, in the 7th century, within the Arabian Peninsula, his influence and movement did spread to people of different backgrounds and tribal backgrounds and even ethnicities as well.
Yeah. Of course. I mean, particularly in that area of the world.
Right.
There was such an intermingling of peoples.
Yes. So, Mr. Forrest, you mentioned that people would be kind of taken aback or impressed when you would tell the locals that I'm going to be playing Khalid in the film. They're like, wow. So my next question is, have you ever in subsequent years been recognized by Muslims by anyone really, but I'm curious to know whether Muslims ever recognize you even today and say, hey, weren't you in that film, The Message? Or if they don't recognize you because many years have elapsed and maybe appearances have changed or whatnot, do you ever just kind of throw that out there? If you're talking to someone from the Muslim world, do you throw that out? I was Khalid in the film, The Message.
Early lot of years ago. I did that in a couple of occasions, and I would mention the fact they would say, "Yes, we saw that film," and I said, "Well, I would." Oh, really?
Yes.
I would say, "Yeah, I played Khalid," and they would look at me and they said, "Oh my God, yes, yes,
Yeah.
remember you now."
But you've exchanged the turban for the cowboy hat, maybe.
Well, time, of course, was, I no longer look like I looked then after all these years. But I mean, it was gratifying then in those years, shortly after I did the film and it was released, that I got that kind of recognition.
Right.
It was very gratifying.
Yeah.
But I mean, it was not a popular film when it first came out.
Yes, unfortunately, there were some surrounding controversies, and that affected, the box office performance. Right. But a lot of great films don't necessarily set the box office on fire in their own time, but they have a lasting value. I think I mentioned this to you already, but this is very interesting. I'm looking at this from a kind of a artistic, creative kind of point of view. But near the end of the film, the narrator says that, Muhammad, peace be upon him, he died, but his movement grew. It multiplied, and it found its way into the hearts of millions of human beings, something to this extent. So, not to compare the film to the religion, but I just find it that it's interesting that the film was kind of similar in that it didn't have this big bang beginning, but I do feel that over the years, it won over even many of the critics. And I don't find really any Muslim critics of that film today. Everybody feels that it had an overall positive educational value, and it brought down a lot of walls of misunderstanding. I actually, my wife relates a story to me. She remembers this in the newspaper in London, England at the time. Now, I know this wasn't your intention as an actor, but I'm just sharing this with you. You might find it interesting that there was a couple, they were not Muslim. There was a couple in London, England in 1976. And they were actually intending to go to another movie at the theater. But that other film, whatever it was sold out. So then they bought 2 tickets to The Message. And that film actually started their spiritual journey to their eventual conversion to Islam. So they both eventually became Muslim, and that film, The Message, played a big part in that,
Oh, that's interesting. I'm sure that's not necessarily an isolated case. I'm sure there are other cases of that similar to that.
Right. So when did you last watch the film? I mean, I'm just curious to know. I mean, don't people watch their own films, or don't you ever kind of just pop in the DVD?
I'm not one who watches my film.
Okay.
If they play on television and somebody says, "Oh, you're on," I depending upon the film, I'll watch it.
Right.
But I'm not a big. It's not like I'm not a fan of myself. I just say, well, it's there. If people like it, I'm glad they do. I look at it with a little more criticism. I say, oh gosh, why did I do that, or something like that. So it's like I'm not one who likes to look at the films that I've done. Now, I haven't seen The Message for 20 years anyway.
Oh no, that is an injustice. I think I think you need to rewatch that. It has a lot of repeat value, in my opinion.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
I'm sure it does. It's just that I'm not a fan of it.
Yeah. Well, if it's any encouragement or support to you, an anonymous lady in my family mentioned to me that, you looked very handsome in that role, very noble with the beard and the turban. I remember you being tall too. I think you're a tall gentleman. They felt that you looked very good, very handsome in the film. Yeah.
Well, that's very nice of them to say so. I mean, I wasn't a bad-looking guy.
No.
As I've gotten older, you look in the mirror and say, "Oh my God, who's that old guy looking back?" That's true of everybody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the people watching this video, I'm sure they would have loved to have seen you as well, but unfortunately, we couldn't do the Zoom video thing. But this is still great to have you on the telephone interview. It's still great.
Oh, thank you.
I'm curious, Mr. Forrest, when you were there in Libya, because these things didn't happen every day. You wouldn't have a big ensemble, a group of American actors traveling to Libya to make a film and staying there for so many weeks. So did you get to meet Muammar Gaddafi? Because I imagine at some point he might want to visit the sets, or I don't know, have you guys for a lunch or something?
No, we never did. We never met him. He wasn't even really mentioned at all, ever. I don't know.
Right.
That whole relationship was, but I do know that he was never on the set. We never met him, so.
Yeah. Well, maybe he wanted to keep a bit of an arm's length distance so as not to add to even more, controversy or anything like that. Maybe just wanted you guys to do your thing, do your craft,
That could very well have been within the province of the outfit, the producing company itself.
Yeah.
I mean, we never met any of the. I met some dignitaries at the British. What do they call it? The British representative.
The embassy or consulate, or
the embassy.
Okay.
At the embassy.
Yes.
Yeah. We had an English nurse on the show, and she was instrumental in having us all. We had some kind of a party at the embassy, which was very pleasant.
Yeah.
But beyond that, we didn't have a lot of contact with any of the dignitaries of Libya.
Yeah.
Although I met a lot of people. I remember one man was married to an Australian woman. He had been in the army, and he no longer was in the army. And he was not very, how should I say it? He was not friendly with the president, the government at the time.
Oh, okay.
He was not. He had been close to Gaddafi at one time, but no longer was.
Right.
For whatever reason. He didn't go into it with you.
Were you already acquainted with horse riding, or was the cast kind of trained on the job on how to ride a horse?
I'd been riding since I was about 9 years old.
Oh, okay.
I was pretty familiar with horses.
Oh, okay.
And they gave me a horse that really was, I'm telling you, this was not a horse easy to ride. The stallion, of course. And I mean, this was a beautiful animal, but you had to be able to control him, because otherwise he'd control you.
Right.
You did not want that to happen with this horse.
That's actually one of the analogies that the Sufi Muslims give for the ego, and they say, you have to ride the ego and control it. Don't let the ego ride you, or your desires. Like your desires are like a horse. You need to keep them in check and rein them in. Otherwise, your desires are going to be riding you in every which way direction.
That is so true. Believe me.
Yeah.
So true. I remember once we were lining up a shot. They were lighting a shot, and I was on horseback at the time.
Yeah.
And I was in the shot with whomever it was, and the horse was getting very jittery, everybody moving around, so forth. And I was trying to keep him calm and so forth, patting him on his neck.
Yeah.
Trying to rein him in when he's done. And then at a certain point, he just reared. He went up. I went right off his back onto the ground, and everybody got a big laugh. I got a laugh out of it too.
Yeah.
The horse was, it's difficult for animals. It's one thing you can tell people who are being lit in a shot.
Yes.
Lights on them and so forth.
Right.
Just has to stand there and take it. A horse doesn't know that.
You can't tell them it's just 30 more minutes or 20 more minutes. Yeah. Yeah,
right. Yeah. It'll be another few minutes. Yeah, right. That horse is not listening. The horse wants to do what it wants to do, and off I went right on my butt.
So, how did you feel? I mean, wearing those clothes, like the turban. Do you still remember how to tie a turban? And how did you feel in the long flowing clothes? They look very nice. I came across a really interesting quote once. This is getting a little bit philosophical here, but there's an Islamic philosopher named Sayyid Hussein Nasr, And he said something which, I mean, there's no way of empirically proving this or disproving this. It's just something that intuitively, it sounded good and it made sense to me when he said it. He said, it's very difficult to be an atheist in long, loose, flowing clothes. So was there something that, I don't know, made you feel more spiritual or something about that whole setup? Or?
Well, the clothes, the costume that I had on, you call it a costume, was really magnificent, really a real piece of work. And I felt very comfortable in it. And I thought, well, I'm not because of the heat and so forth. And yet, I was never overly overheated in it. You know,
right.
I felt comfortable in it.
Yeah.
If anything had to be done to take a stitch in it or something like that, I never touched it. They always had wardrobe people doing that. I mean, it wasn't like they told me you mustn't touch anything. It's just that they were right there all the time, taking care of things.
You know, a thought just occurred to me, and this might be another one of those generalizations. I might be wrong about this, but at least in the summertime in California, you can, the clothes that many people wear outside, that is what would be considered like underwear for many Arabs and Muslims, for traditional Muslims, right?
Sure.
But then I'm thinking it's the opposite way around too. The traditional clothing of the Arab and of the Muslim, which is these kind of long or loose clothes, if you think about it, that's the kind of pajamas that most Americans probably wear at night, because, it is comfortable to wear like loose, soft, silky pants or long shirts, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It is strange. It really is something like that.
Yeah. Here's I've got a couple of tough questions for you now, right? So,
okay.
Yeah. So here's tough question number one, right? Did you get any flack or did you get any criticism for having worked in this film? Not in the sense of your acting or your role, but in general, or even from the industry. Was there any kind of blowback from any colleagues in the industry? Like, why did you work in a quote unquote Arab film or a Islamic film? Or was that kind of thing not a problem back then?
That was never a problem. In fact, people were saying, gee, you worked in this Arab film. Right. Well, what were the people like? I mean, they were always interested in what the situation was.
Right.
I never had a criticism for having been in an Arab film, like a bad word or something like that. No, never got anything like that.
Well, here's the tough follow-up question then. I want you to imagine that it's September 12th, 2001. And you were offered a role to play in The Message or in a similar film. What would your response have been on that day?
Probably the same as it was when I originally accepted the role. I was excited that I was going to be in the Arabic countries, which I had never been in before, and I was going to be listening to a language that I was unfamiliar with.
Right.
And so, I think I would have been just as... why that particular date?
Yeah, no, that would be a good question. Yeah, why that particular date? Yeah. Or are you asking me why did I pick that date?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, because I was alluding to the September 11th attacks, right? Like 9/11. So what I meant was, would you have feared more criticism or blowback, due to those events? Yeah.
Well, when I thought to think about it, I probably would have, but I'm always of the opinion these kind of isolated incidents.
Yes.
Are isolated incidents. They don't have, just because they were done by people from the Arabic world, does not mean that all of the people from the Arabic world
want
to do that.
Yeah.
So, I'm of that opinion. So something like that would never occur to me.
Yes. Yeah. No, that's very admirable.
One Arab person does it, all Arabs are going to do it.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, right.
Ever.
So do you think that the film is still relevant for today? Do you think the film is still relevant for a new generation, for today's generation?
Well, not having seen it for some time, I'm not sure. But I think any film that is done with the care that this was done, that it would have some importance in a learning experience about the world of Islam.
Yes.
That so many people have no idea about, as I didn't. I had very little understanding of the world at all. As a matter of fact, Michael Ansara, who of course you know was in it, I'd known Michael Ansara for years, worked with him before. I did not know that he had been born in Syria.
I'm trying to remember. He's not the gentleman who played Bilal, the Ethiopian. That's not him, is that? Oh, no. Michael, he played Abu Sufyan, I think. He played the leader. He played the leader of the pagan Arab side. I think that's the one.
I'm not sure. But he was born in Syria.
Okay, no, I did not know that.
And I didn't know he was Arabic. One day I was in Morocco, having just played tennis. I'm walking in the hall in the hotel, and I see this guy coming toward me, and I look and I say, "Mike, I'm sorry." And his eyes were kind of bloodshot. He said, "I just flew in from L.A. They wanted to interview me for this film." I said, "Oh, are you going to do it?" "Yeah." I said, "Well, great. We'll have dinner tonight." "No, I'm flying back to L.A. tonight."
Yeah.
He just arrived, and now he's flying back.
Yeah.
And then in the course of the film, I found out that he was originally born in Syria.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. There are lots of Christians of Arab descent, especially of Lebanese and Syrian descent, who came to America, who came to South America, even as far back as 1920s and 1930s. And now they're second, third generation. And, they've just kind of integrated and mixed in with other people. Yeah.
Well, Michael Ansara is about 3 or 4 years older than I.
Yes.
So he was born sometime in 1926 or 25, something like that.
Okay.
But again, as I say, he said when he came there, now he's in the Arabian countries, and he no longer speaks Arabic.
Yeah.
When he was a very young child, but the family wanted him to learn English and forget the Arab language.
Right.
Which he had done, and he said he couldn't speak Arabic to any of the people who knew he had been born in Syria and wanted to speak to him in Arabic. And of course, he could speak maybe a half a dozen words, but he was so disappointed to no longer speak the language.
Yeah. On that note, then, are you still in contact with any of your co-stars from that movie, like Mr. Garrick Hagon? I mean, I know he's alive.
No.
No? Okay.
No, I have not had any contact with any of them. The only ones that I did have any contact with was Michael Ansara.
Okay.
Died 2 or 3 years ago, a couple of years ago, something like that.
Yeah.
But he's the only one. Anthony Quinn.
Yes.
He and I, it wasn't that we didn't get along. Anthony Quinn was a kind of a egotist. He was a strange kind of guy. Let's put it like that. I had great respect for him as an actor and so forth.
Yeah.
But as a person, we had our differences.
Yeah.
Which is not really that important, but
yeah. Well, it's a sign of it's we
have afterwards.
Yeah. Well, it's always a sign of professionalism when you're able to put that aside and just work and continue to make the film, and none of that shows on the film, and that's part of the amazing thing about it,
Yeah, it's funny how many times, and this is true of all people for the most part in films, you can be in a film for a week, 2 weeks, a month, 2 months, or something like that, and develop intense relationships with a person.
Yes.
But once the film is over, unless you have real contact or make any effort, you're just going to lose whatever friendship you had.
Yeah, and that's just totally understandable, especially in such a busy industry as well too. I think as we start wrapping this up, I mean, I just wanted to give my own 2 cents on the film, which is that I definitely, believe that it is still very relevant for today's generation. I mean, I'll fill you in with some information from the other side that you may or may not be aware of, but in every major Islamic conference in the West, so like I've been to the ISNA, Islamic Society of North America conference in America. In England, there used to be the Global Peace and Unity, GPU conference. Here in Canada, there's RIS, Reviving the Islamic Spirit conference. At every one of these major conferences, when you're in the bazaar area where they have the vendor stalls set up, there will invariably always be a stall, selling books and DVDs where they will be selling the Message, DVD. So for our community, it certainly has a lot of repeat value. And just looking at it from a kind of an amateur film critic point of view, I personally don't think that it should or that it can be remade. I'm kind of old school, and so I like the real stunts and I like real people being on the set. I'm not a fan of the CGI effects where they recreate like an army of 5,000, computerized graphics kind of scenes. So I really like the fact that the Message just feels very natural, very raw, and very real. Not computer generated graphics or things like that. But that's just my own personal opinion on that matter.
Well, that's good. That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody has their own particular viewpoint on whatever films or films that they've seen or been in touch with over the years.
Yeah. Do you remember any comedic mishaps, anything funny? I don't know, Anthony Quinn falling off the horse. Well, you did mention, I think you mentioned yourself falling off the horse.
Yeah, I did. I mean, there was one time we were always being fed on locations, always.
Right.
Food was by an English company.
Okay.
Provided the food. And one day I went up to we were way out in the desert, and I said and here I'm dressed in my outfit. I look just like an Arab. And this one guy came, he says, yes, sir. And I said, in my best English accent, I said, please, sir, can I have some more? And he looked at me, and he said, more? Out of, the film.
Yeah.
He called the other guy in, and then he realized that I wasn't an Arab, that I was speaking English.
Okay.
Then I said, well, I'm actually an American. And he got even a bigger laugh out of that.
All right, I get it, because you were in your Arab dress at the time, right?
And he really thought I was an Arab.
Yeah.
I never said anything to him before. When I said, please, sir, can I have some more?
Yeah.
He looked at me like,
yeah, the question that reminded me of that, I just thought of it now, is that if I'm not mistaken, if my memory is serving correctly, you had kind of like a British accent in the film. So I was going to ask you that, did you put on a bit of a British accent, or did they do a voiceover kind of thing?
Somebody else dubbed me.
Okay, I see.
I was not available to do the dubbing because I was doing another film.
I see. I got to track that guy down next now for my next interview. That was another situation. Yeah.
I mean, I was disappointed.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah,
it happens many times.
Yeah. Well, I think
I dubbed Jack Palance, the actor. I am sure you are familiar with him.
Okay. I'm not sure.
Anyway, an American actor, and I did his voice 3 times in 3 different films.
Oh.
And the people would hear me do it, and they say, my God, that sounds just like Jack Palance.
Yeah.
Well, I can't imitate him, but when I hear a line read by this kind of growly voice that he had, which was kind of like this.
Yeah.
And I would do that, and people would say, gee, that sounds just like him.
Yeah.
So, I did an awful lot of dubbing.
Yeah.
Living in Italy as I did, I did an awful lot of voices.
Yeah.
But for this particular film,
Yeah.
I was not available.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to tell, and to be honest with you, I mean, I think your role was very visual as well too. Like it required a physical presence, a commanding presence,
Yeah.
and you definitely had that. You definitely had that screen presence, in that role. So I mean, you've been very, very generous with your time, Mr. Ford. Just my second last question was if there was anything else that you found interesting about the shooting of the film that you remember that you wanted to share. Chances are we probably, covered all of the important points that you remember, but if there's anything else you wanted to share at the end, feel free.
Well, there's one incident which had nothing to do with the film itself. I'll just relate this, and you can use it as you will.
Sure.
We were out on location, and it was because it was always hot, and there was a man, one of the older fellows, a British actor, sitting in a chair under a tent, under an umbrella, and I went past him, and I said something to him, and he kind of didn't move. His eyes blinked and looked at me, and I said, this does not look good. I went to the nurse, a British nurse, and I said, I think you should look at so-and-so. I think he's got too much sun. So she went over to him and started talking with him. And within a minute, they brought an ambulance in, or a car, acted like an ambulance. They took him to the hospital. Had he been out there one more hour. I'd like to think that I saved a life.
Yeah, well, that is good to hear. A lot of people from the West who just haven't been in a very hot climate in Asia or Africa don't realize that. And that applies to me as well. When I visited Syria back in the early 2000s, that almost happened to me too. Like I decided to go for a long midday afternoon walk in the open air souk. Oh, I was excited. I mean, I just arrived there the previous day. I want to explore the streets, and I did not realize that you need to take shelter in the shade. You need to take breaks. You need to cover your head if your head is uncovered under the hot sun. And I do remember like getting kind of faint, and I went home and I just didn't kind of feel right. But thank God, everything was all right. But I always remembered that experience myself. Yeah.
Well, I know that I've always remembered this incident, and I thought, well, maybe I'm exaggerating, but they said 1 hour more and he would have been dead.
Yeah. No, very, very possible.
So, well, maybe I was instrumental in saving his life.
Yeah. Thank God. That's a good story. That's a good story to hear. So my final question, I'm hopefully you were briefed on this and you got the heads up, because this is something that I just have to ask on behalf of many of the Muslim viewers, who are going to be watching this video on my channel, is that, did you have any kind of questions about Islam? Is there anything that you ever wanted to ask a Muslim? Not that I have all the answers, but I might have some answers. If there's anything that you've ever wanted to ask, please feel free, or just any comment or anything that you want to share, anything.
Well, it's funny. Offhand, I can't think of anything. Most of the time I got the answers. I would ask a question about the people, what they knew about the people then as compared to the people that were now living and still experiencing the religion of Muhammad. And most of the time I got the kind of answers that I wanted. People were very forthright in their answering any question that I would ask. Not that I asked, tricky questions or intellectual questions. I'm certainly not an intellectual, but I mean, anytime I had a question about anything, it was always very forthright.
Right.
Would even if they, for example, did not particularly care for Gaddafi. Example.
Yes.
This one guy who had been a soldier and had been a close friend of Gaddafi's, he was quite forthright. He didn't elaborate extensively, but he made it very clear that he was not in favor of Gaddafi, what he was doing at that time.
Right.
And it's interesting you hear it from an ex-soldier. He was a soldier.
Yeah.
Officer in the army.
Right.
I mean, he made it very clear he was not pleased with Gaddafi at all.
Yeah.
Oh, it was interesting. It's so long ago. A lot of it I've kind of forgotten.
Yes.
A lot of it brings back a lot of memories of the desert. I do know that I met the head man, the blue people in Morocco.
Of the who people?
Familiar with them?
Of the
people of Morocco. In the what is it? The Atlas Mountains.
Oh, did you say the Moor people?
The blue.
Oh, the blue people. I'm not entirely sure right now. No, I'm not. I don't know.
The blue people are nomadic.
Okay.
And the reason they are called the blue people is because all of their clothing, everything they wear, is in different shades of blue.
Okay. Yeah.
Light blue.
I see.
They live the same as they've lived for 1,000 years, if not longer. They live in the desert in tents.
Okay.
And the first time we saw them, these were living in tents right on the location where we were shooting.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, now we're going to a hotel tonight. Where are they going? And then I thought, oh, this is the way they live.
Yeah.
And I met the head man who stood about 4'10".
Yeah.
Very short man.
Yes.
And treated us. And the reason he treated us because the nurse had distributed an anti-venom against what is it? A certain bite that you can get from.
Okay. It wasn't COVID-19. I know that.
No, it wasn't. At any rate, she was invited to his tent, and she asked me to go with her. And oh my God, was I glad to go with her. It was like out of the Arabian Nights. I could not believe what I experienced when I went into this man's tent. This was out in the middle of the desert.
Yes.
And I mean, I thought I was in a film.
Yeah, I see.
Real. It was for real.
Yeah.
Tea was served, little sweet biscuits, stuff was served. I mean, and this is where they spoke French, and I spoke French, and I was able to communicate with them. Otherwise, there was no communication because neither one of us, the nurse, who spoke only English, and neither one of us spoke Arabic at all.
Yeah. They
didn't speak any English except one guy spoke French. Two of them spoke French, and that's how we were able to communicate.
I see.
About that.
Yeah.
It was incredible. Yeah. But they're called the blue people.
Yeah. I just looked them up. They're a Berber people. So these are people who even predate, the Arabs coming into that region. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm sure.
Yes.
Yes. And they're the one. The reason they were there is because they had camels.
Okay.
The camels were used extensively.
Yes.
They brought something like when they went to Libya, they moved the whole tribe. These blue people. With their camels, 200 camels, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
What a move that had to be.
Yeah. Well, they were probably excited to see all the white people from America.
Well,
yeah, they were like, look at all those white people. Yeah.
Can you imagine? White people.
Well, Mr. Forrest, to be honest with you, I was really impressed at the fact that you did remember so much about the film. My expectations were lowered because I was communicating with someone else through the email, to speaking with you, and I was told that you might not remember a lot, but I'm actually just really impressed at how much you do remember about the shooting, and it was great for you to share these memories and to relive these memories with us, because now when the viewers watch this film, The Message, they'll actually know a little bit more about, the actor who played Khalid bin Walid. And I know for me, watching that film will never be the same again, because now when I watch it and I see you, I'm like, oh, I talked to him, I interviewed him. So that really kind of connects me with the film in a different kind of way now. Yeah. Well,
listen, it's been a pleasure for me, I must tell you.
Oh, it's been my honor, my pleasure. And again, I do need to make that invite to you that anytime you have any questions, including any tricky questions, I like tricky questions. You can feel free to email me with any questions that you have. And if you don't already have an English translation of the Quran or any other literature on Islam or anything like that, I would be very happy to send that to you via mail. So please keep that in mind, and I hope that to just do a double play on those words. I hope that you kind of remain open to the message, the message of Islam.
I'll never forget it. It's not something that's easily to forget.
No, yeah.
I must tell you, I spent a lot of time in Toronto. You're from Toronto.
Yes,
right?
yes. Well, when God willing, when this COVID thing is over, I'd love to have you and your family over for dinner. Please connect with me if you do ever come to Toronto. I would.
I worked on the CBC.
Yes.
Toronto.
Oh, yeah. CBC, right.
60, 61, and 62. Long before your time, but I worked there, and I had a wonderful experience. I really did.
Right. Well, it would honestly, it would be an honor for me anytime you're in town. God willing, when this COVID thing is over, we would, my family and I, we'd love to have you for dinner, or we could take you out for some, amazing Indian food. It might even make you forget the tea and food experience that you had in Libya. Who knows? Yeah.
I can tell. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your time, for being so gracious. It was very enjoyable. And just from the very first minute we started talking, I've been having a lot of fun. So thank you so much to you. And God bless you. God guide and bless you and all of us. Thank you very much, sir.
You bet. Bye-bye.
Okay, take care now. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye.